The DCT-159, G-Sword the Tank, the E-77, and the Object 265T are all examples among the many Tier 9 tanks that have been released in the last year. And after taking stock of the sheer number of Tier 9 tanks that Wargaming has released lately, it's obvious that the push for more Tier 9 content isn't a trend that is going to be slowing down anytime soon. And if I were to ask you guys why Wargaming is pushing Tier 9 content so hard right now, most of you guys would look at me and say, well, duh, isn't it for money, right? And while you wouldn't necessarily be wrong for thinking that, this also doesn't fully explain the push for so many Tier 9 reward tanks, especially the ones that were given away for free, like G-Sword and Patton the Tank. And it's for this reason that I think that Wargaming had a different motive when they added these vehicles in, especially since they were given away to everybody and they didn't require any grinding. So if Wargaming isn't directly profiting from the release of all these Tier 9 reward tanks, and at the same time we're seeing a huge influx of Tier 9 premium tanks, what is the overarching motivation behind the sudden push for Tier 9 content? Now, the answers to that question might come as a surprise to some of you, and with them comes a troubling sign of what I believe might be in store for Tier 9. And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today. For all of you guys to better understand what I'm about to present to you, I want to start off by saying this. I believe that there are 4 major drivers behind Wargaming's push for Tier 9 content, 2 of which I believe have been severely understated and overlooked by the majority of the World of Tanks community. But before we dive into what those are, we also need to understand the obvious reasons like money and player engagement so we can clearly see why those reasons alone don't paint the full picture. And without taking too much time in this section, what I first want to talk about is player engagement, and more specifically, the reasoning behind Wargaming's push for reward tanks. Reward tanks such as the AE Phase 1 and the Char MLE4 first started out as incentives for players to grind events. But it wasn't until their addition into the Battle Pass store that Wargaming's thought process with reward tanks became clear. Their intended goal with reward tanks was to have something that players would work towards over time, and especially when this reward is something like a high tier tank that's actually decent or even fun, they're more likely to log in daily. And this consistent engagement benefits Wargaming in 2 major ways. It boosts player retention while also indirectly fueling monetization. But as we know, Battle Pass reward tanks aren't the only way that Wargaming has kept us both engaged and spending money at the same time. And it really won't come as any surprise given the fact that Tier 9 reward tanks were received so well that Wargaming eventually broke that seal with the first Tier 9 premium tank being the Stridsvagn K, and it also having a marathon to go along with it. And having said this brings us to our next and most obvious driver behind Tier 9 content, monetization. Put simply, Tier 9 premium tanks are a goldmine for Wargaming. But why exactly is this, and why do players love buying and playing them so much? Well, it's not because they print more credits, because their repair costs are higher. Perhaps it's the fact that they make credits and they make bonds. But I believe there's actually another, more important reason why players love Tier 9 premium tanks so much, and that is matchmaking. Tier 9 is what I would describe as the sweet spot in World of Tanks matchmaking, and it's really easy to see why. The worst case scenario is that you're bottom tier versus tier 10, and the best case scenario is that you get to go and bully tier 7s. And this form of preferential matchmaking makes tier 9 a much more comfortable experience when compared to being in tier 8, which regularly gets matched up against tier 10s. But it's not just about comfort. At tier 9, you're not only more capable, you also have more influence over the battle outcome, regardless of whether you're bottom tier or whether you're top tier. And that feeling of control is a big part of the reason why players love Tier 9 so much. And it's not as if Wargaming is oblivious to this fact. They understand very well that players are willing to spend for that better matchmaking experience, whether it be with their time or their hard-earned money. And that's also exactly why they can get away with designing Tier 9 premium tanks that are often just side grades or improved versions of their Tier 8 counterparts. But let's come back to the main point here. Understanding why Wargaming is pushing Tier 9 premium tanks is only telling one half of the story. What about the free reward tanks like G-Sword the Tank, which were basically given away, no strings attached? And especially if there's no direct link between pushing player engagement or making direct revenue from these tanks, this prompts the question, why were these tanks released in the first place? And to understand this, we're gonna need to dive a little bit deeper. What I realized when I started looking into this more was that all Tier 9 tanks that have been released in either a premium or reward form serve a secondary purpose, and it has nothing to do with Tier 9's inherent desirability, and it has everything to do with a tier below it, Tier 8, and more specifically, the oversaturation of Tier 8 in the matchmaker. Now, you may be asking, what does the oversaturation of tier 8 even have to do with tier 9? And that's where I want to bring up the new matchmaker, which is being tested on the EU1 server. In this new iteration of matchmaking, the matchmaker will try to prioritize +1 -1 matchmaking as much as possible, while also trying to reduce the amount of +2 -2 matches that it creates. But in order to do this, it has to evenly distribute the various tanks across different tiers in order to create these +1 -1 matches. But a system like this will struggle if there are too many of one tier in the queue at once. And this is where the issue arises. As it currently stands, according to server statistics from Tomato.gg, tier 8 is completely overrepresented and oversaturated in the matchmaking right now. And this is a huge problem for the new matchmaker to overcome. And if I'm being honest, it's a huge problem for the matchmaking right now. A huge part of why tier 7 is so insufferable to play right now is because you are almost always matched up against a tier 8, many of which are completely just bonkers OP. And that is because the matchmaker is trying to distribute as many tier 8s into battle as possible. And this is where we're going to circle back to tier 9. The first thing that I want you guys to understand is that tier 9 is what we can call a buffer tier. And if you're wondering what buffer tiers are, then let me break it down for you. Buffer tiers are the essential tiers in World of Tanks which allow the matchmaker to naturally create +1 -1 matchmaking and act as a bridge between overpopulated tiers. In this case, it's between tier 8 and tier 10. And because tier 9 is acting as this buffer per se, the more tier 9 vehicles that are in the matchmaker, the easier it is to create matches where tier 8s can be placed in tier 8 and 9 games, and the more it can avoid putting those tier 8s in tier 10 games. And by increasing and maintaining a healthy population of tier 9s in the matchmaker, this works to reduce the amount of frustrating bottom tier games that tier 8s have to go into, and it makes it much easier for the current and the future matchmaking system to prioritize +1 -1 battles. So when Wargaming is releasing tier 9 premiums, they're not only printing money, they're also helping to saturate tier 9, which strengthens it as a buffer tier. And the more saturated that tier becomes over time, the more frequently +1 -1 matchmaking can occur naturally without needing to increase queue time or force a hardline rule. And this is where everything becomes clear. I believe that this buffer tier theory explains exactly why Wargaming continues to release more reward tanks, especially with tanks like G-Sor and Pat in the Tank, which were handed out to everyone regardless of their skill level and regardless of how long they've been playing the game for. Wargaming's goal wasn't just to be generous here, but it was to get more people playing tier 9 to bolster it as a buffer tier. And this makes perfect sense from their perspective. If they want the new matchmaking system to reliably prioritize +1 -1 matchmaking, then saturating key buffer tiers like tier 9 isn't just optional, it's a necessary condition for that system to work. Alrighty, before we move on to the next section, I want to ask you guys that if you are enjoying this video, for you guys to leave a like, and more importantly, I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section on what I just talked about. If you're also wanting to support me, the best way to do this is to subscribe to the channel because I have a lot more videos just like this one planned for the future, and I don't want you guys to miss out. So now that we understand one of the major hidden drivers behind this push for tier 9 content, the second one that I want to talk about is going to be a little bit more speculative, and it has to do with the upcoming September update. Based on what we've seen from the official Wargaming teaser video and a couple different leak websites, what I believe is coming down the pipeline is tier 11. Now, whether you're one of the players that openly welcomes tier 11 or you're vehemently against it, there's one thing that is for certain, that tier 11 is going to change the matchmaker in a couple different ways. Not only will tier 10 be bottom tier for the first time in World of Tanks history, tier 9 is also going to lose its preferential matchmaking. And that is because tier 9s will almost certainly be placed in tier 11 matches. Now, you may be saying to me, well, if there's going to be a new matchmaker that prioritizes +1 -1 matchmaking, shouldn't tier 9s not see tier 11s that much? But that's where the problem lies, is that tier 11 is going to be so new that there aren't going to be enough played in order for them to have just tier 11 matches or just tier 10 and 11 matches. What this means is that there's going to be a need for tier 9 tanks to fill out the 3-5-7 format, which we are all too familiar with in tier 8. And because of the release of tier 11s, tier 9 will likely become the new version of tier 8. And I'm sure you can understand why that worries me a little bit, given the fact that Wargaming's history with tier 8 has been just exceptionally terrible. Because when I look back at what Wargaming did to tier 8, and then I also see the strength of tier 9 premium tanks that are coming out today, it unnerves me because I'm worried that we are going to repeat the same cycle that tier 8 went through. And that is that we are going to see the arrival of more and more powerful tier 9 premium tanks and ones that are able to face tier 11s and do that just fine. Just in the same way that tier 8 had power creep basically push more and more powerful tier 8s that were able to face tier 10s. And that is essentially because Wargaming's design philosophy for premium tanks was to take a tier 10 with tier 10 characteristics and dumb it down to be sold as a premium tank. Now, we also see the same pattern repeated, but for taking a tier 10 concept and then making it into a tier 9 tank. But this alone doesn't really concern me. What my main concern is that eventually, as power creep continues in tier 9, we're gonna start taking tier 11 characteristics, or worse, tier 11 abilities, things that realistically should only remain at tier 11, and then start placing them in tier 9 premium tanks. And that, as we know, is going to affect the balance of everything from tier 9 down to possibly tier 7, because even with the +1 -1 matchmaking, we're still going to have some matches where tier 7s are going to see tier 9s. And if any of this sounds familiar, that's because this is the same exact pattern that befell tier 8. And if this repeats again, it has the potential to ruin tier 9 as the most fun tier in the game. Now, I know some of you guys may be thinking tier 11 hasn't even arrived yet, why are we worrying, we don't even know if it's coming yet, but the problem has already partially arrived, because we've already seen tier 9 premium tanks get more and more powerful, and these premiums are basically on par, if not better, than their tech tree counterparts. And we all know some of the examples that I'm talking about: the Eric Concept 1, the DZT 159, the Object 752. These are all exceptional performers at tier 9, and in some cases are better performers than tech tree counterparts. And my worry is that that is going to become the standard, which will only become more powerful as time goes on. And all that there's really left to do now is just to hope that somebody in the balance department talks to somebody in the marketing department and says, whoa dude, we need to slow down here. But when have we ever seen that happen in World of Tanks history? And it's really kind of a shame for both us as the player base and for Wargaming. Because really, premium tanks don't need to be excessively powerful in order to be novel and in order for them to actually sell well. And I wish this is something that Wargaming would actually recognize. Now, this is a topic that I could talk at length about, but it falls outside the scope of this video. But if you want to hear me follow up on this topic and topics like these, then I encourage you guys to subscribe to the channel and to also like this video so that it can get out to more people. But most of all, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on the topics that were covered in this video. Do you guys think it's plausible that Wargaming is creating more tier 9s in order to bolster tier 9 as a buffer tier? And do you also think that tier 9 is going to suffer the same fate as tier 8s? Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. And with this all said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I am wishing you guys all a great day, and I will see you guys soon in the next one. Peace.